Welcome, Atom's Child, on this very special day where we commemorate the day Atom blessed our world with his glow, and where I want to walk through the events moment by moment of the day that changed everything. On the eve of the Great War, the world looked quite different from our own, and had been primed and pressurized in a way that the only logical conclusion is that everything inevitably erupt in atomic flame. The US had invaded and occupied Mexico, annexed all of Canada, and after repelling the Chinese invasion of Alaska, they took the fight to the Chinese mainland. Brutal, savage fighting is taking place around Shanghai and Shantou as American forces push towards their ultimate goal, Beijing, all with some jingoistic and manic leaders calling for a preemptive nuclear strike. Back in the US, things are not rosy for everyone. Protests, strikes, and forced rationing were common. Civilians were kept in line through military checkpoints, deployments of the Army and National Guard, and through mass surveillance. One group of soldiers and officers, sickened by the grotesque biological experiments being done in secret, took control of a military base in California and declared themselves deserters, the first step towards a fierce, independent post-war faction. The nation's leaders were suspiciously absent. 6 months prior, the White House stood mostly dark, while the president had relocated to a secret offshore oil rig. And on the eve of the Great War, the Capitol building stood empty, with a number of elected officials and cabinet members getting early warnings and quickly heading to tax-funded shelters, like the White Springs bunker, without telling the civilian population a single thing. Meanwhile, America was dotted with Vault-Tec vaults that were meant to shelter people from nuclear annihilation, but had a secret, sinister purpose. Some vaults, like Vault 4, already had the residents inside, with most other finished vaults conducting regular drills to make sure the dwellers and staff would be ready for the Day of Days. Some vaults stood unfinished and were in no way able to shelter people, while others were incomplete, but mostly functioning. In this environment, the whole world seemed to be holding its breath, but that couldn't stop what was coming. In the hours just before the infamous day, October 23, 2077, plans were set into motion. October 23, 2077, 3 minutes past midnight, the US Pacific Fleet detects 3 unknown submerged objects off the coast of California. Detecting unidentified submersible objects near the coast is not unheard of, but 3 is unusual, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff are informed. Other Chinese submarines move into position unbeknownst to the Navy, like just off the coast of Boston. 3:37 in the morning, the US Air Force detects and begins tracking a squadron of suspected Chinese aircraft at high altitude over the Bering Strait, entering restricted US airspace that only months ago was filled with Chinese and US bombers and fighters. 3:57 in the morning, Vault 79, the nation's new Fort Knox that is meant to preserve most of the nation's gold reserves into the apocalypse, intercepts communications traffic from the US Air Force and decides to close and seal off the vault. Over the next couple of hours, some, but not all, Vault-Tec vaults were contacted and told to begin yet another drill. Although this time it was no drill, and some overseers suspected as much. After 5 hours of frenzied activity and communications, at 9:13 in the morning, the Integrated Operational Nuclear Detection System reports heart-stopping news: 4 probable missile launches. The DEFCON level is subsequently elevated from 3 to 2. This event is suspect because of the extremely limited number of launches, which is contrary to the expectation of thousands of launches in a first strike scenario. 4 minutes later, at 9:17, the North American Aerospace Defense Command detects birds in the air. The US's military readiness is elevated to the highest level possible, DEFCON 1. 9 minutes later, at 9:26, most of America was enjoying a chilly, lazy Saturday morning, while the US government did the unthinkable. An authenticated order from an executive codenamed Bagman authorized an official response, Scenario MXCN91, using authentication code 0000000000, a concerningly simple code. Military installations and missile bases throughout the nation received the authentication to begin an official military response, including Fort Constantine just outside of Washington, D.C., and the Hopeville Missile Base west of Las Vegas. American bombers start flying towards their targets, submarines ascend to launch depths, and ICBM stations begin transmitting launch signals, and there is no turning back. The response did not always work as intended. Launch failures caused ICBMs to get stuck in their launch tubes, like at Fort Constantine. Some suffered catastrophic failure and broke open the warhead, leaking radiation everywhere. And some missiles never even had a chance to launch. Absent leadership concerned for their own safety prevented launches at Silo Charlie in Appalachia, and errors within leadership also prevented missiles to launch, like at Site Alpha in West Virginia. And a combination of both afflicted other bases, like the Hopeville Missile Base, which was built on an active fault line and experiencing regular earthquakes, preventing their destructive warheads from ever reaching their targets. The Black Mountain Military Communications Array just outside of Las Vegas tracks Chinese satellites and, by extension, the magnitude of the incoming Chinese attack. China appeared to throw everything they had at the US, and the US did not hold back either. Such was the analysis of Black Mountain, only 2 minutes before impacts. A few lucky civilians are given warnings to get to shelter from military officers who knew firsthand the magnitude of what was about to unfold, like the note left by a colonel to the co-founder of Wilson Atomatoys. Others were not given warnings, rather instructed to lock themselves down and keep working, like the scientists working at the Cambridge Polymer Labs in Boston. Without a single siren, as people went on walks, socialized, and even attended birthday parties, the first nukes impacted the West Coast. Los Angeles takes multiple direct strikes, with the very first explosion being very peculiar in speed, shape, and shockwave attributes. The West Tech facility that first engineered the forced evolutionary virus south of LA is targeted by multiple warheads, not quite destroying the facility but heavily damaging and irradiating it. The West Coast is bombarded, and with each passing moment, more missiles make their way from the east, landing on American cities like darkness that chases a setting sun. Las Vegas and the surrounding areas are targeted by 77 missiles, and Robert House's missile defense systems, composed of radar jammers and laser defenses, is able to intercept 68 of the warheads before they can make landfall, saving the city proper, but irradiating much of the greater area, including the Black Mountain Communications Array. Salt Lake City is targeted by 13 warheads, completely destroying it and turning it into a ruin of concrete, twisted metal, and radiation. State capitals and other high-profile cities suffer their first strikes as missiles impact like a wave from the west towards the east, destroying cities like Chicago, and at 9:42 a.m., Pennsylvania and New York are reported as having been struck. East Coast news broadcasts are able to report strikes for less than 1 minute before they are wiped off the air by the nuclear destruction and intense electromagnetic pulses from each detonation. Sirens begin to sound in Boston and elsewhere, and people begin to panic. Some demand entry into Vault-Tec vaults, others pack up what little belongings they have in their cars to drive somewhere, anywhere, and yet others accept their fate, to burn in the fires of Atom. Yet still a small contingent of the population retreat to their own personal fallout shelters built by their own hands, or sometimes paid for by taxpayers to varying degrees of success. Military vehicles block off streets as soldiers try and direct civilians, and vertibirds frantically fly military personnel where they are needed. Off the coast of Boston, a Chinese submarine called the Yangtze ascends to launch depths and fires off all but one of their nuclear-tipped missiles at unknown targets. Vault-Tec officially upgrades their drills to the real thing, and people begin to rush to their vaults to be sealed in, like Vault 76 in Appalachia, 111 in Boston, and Vault 118 in Maine. Some vaults are not finished, like Vault 63, but are populated anyway. A peculiar-looking and heavily fortified military installation called the Sentinel Site southwest of Boston was built to use nuclear-tipped anti-ballistic missiles to try and intercept incoming threats. For some reason, they are not informed of the incoming missiles and were desperately tracking inbound warheads, trying to get a hold of superiors to confirm that this was indeed not a drill. As they were deciding what to do, one of the targets split into multiple, indicative of a multiple independently targetable reentry vehicle platform, and they finally decided they had to act. The installation began launch procedures for intercepting inbound warheads, but they were too late. At 9:47 a.m., a blinding flash, and seconds later, a raging shockwave and glowing mushroom cloud engulfs the southwest corner of Boston. The bomb is devastatingly powerful and nearly kills the last group of Vault 111 dwellers who were seeking safety in the vault. It knocked the Sentinel Site offline mid-launch, trapping all personnel inside blast doors and sealed shut, with no way to get out. A secret defense intelligence agency base underground has systems knocked offline and is quickly abandoned, while other high-tech facilities like the MedTech Research Facility in Boston enters an automated security lockdown that is fatally enforced by a small army of robots. Many places lose power, and most places lose their communication arrays. All manner of aircraft are knocked out of the sky. Vertibirds filled with soldiers lose control from the EMP blast and shockwave, falling to Earth with only some lucky passengers surviving. Enormous nuclear-powered jet airliners suffer much worse fates, as their communications, navigation, and even control systems are fried by the nuclear blasts, causing them to plummet towards the Earth, killing everybody on board. Only a minute after the large detonation near Boston, the missiles start falling on the nation's capital. Luckily, word had spread enough by the time bombs started going off that some people were headed to fallout shelters, but it wasn't enough to save most people. The National Isolated Radio Array in West Virginia picked up the electrical pulses from nuclear detonations in DC, as military bases like Fort Bannister and Constantine were pummeled, and the White House was completely destroyed with only an irradiated crater remaining. Somehow the nation's Capitol building escapes a direct hit, as does the Pentagon and nearly all the culturally important memorials in Washington, D.C. In the chaos of atomic annihilation, though, some American-made ordnance accidentally lands on U.S. soil. Some bombs and missiles don't arrive at their intended target, but luckily, none of them seem to go off. Even as the last straggling bombs and missiles make their way to the cratered American surface, Vault-Tec experiments were just beginning. Like Vault 112 in California, that was built to not shut all the way and purposefully subject its dwellers to the fallout with drastic effects. The White Springs bunker that took in a number of federal leaders and elected officials, at least the ones that were not removed from the early warning system, had its hard lines to two other important facilities severed: the Raven Rock Government Bunker Facility and the Poseidon oil rig, where the President of the United States was sheltering from the storm just off the coast of California. But there is absolutely no form of high-level leadership for the rest of the nation, or what was left of it. Approximately 12 p.m., after only 2 hours from the first impacts, the most devastating global event the Earth has ever seen is over. After the earth-shattering sounds and metal-rending shockwaves have ceased, all that remains is a broken, blasted, and irradiated landscape with raging fires, choking chemical disasters, and death beyond imagination. Corpses, skeletons, ash is all that remains of the majority of Americans, and in these hopeless circumstances, true heroes tried to help. What is left of the National Guard and first responders like police, firemen, and medical personnel help where they can. Camps are set up to treat the wounded and feed those in need. Military checkpoints are designated as safe houses for forces to regroup and potentially defend against a Chinese invasion, while others mark off intensely irradiated areas and even organize to fend off the growing crisis of looting and violence that a scared and desperate portion of the population has resorted to. Some things are for sure. The world will never be the same again. The nightmares that were born from the atomic fire would surpass even the most vivid fever dreams. And, as has been said in various forms before, war would still never change. Thank you for spending some time with me on this special day, the tragedy that makes our beloved series what it is, without whom we couldn't even utter the name Fallout. I hope to see you soon in my next full-length video.